When Donald Trump demanded $2.8 trillion from Canada last week, it wasn't just a political statement. It was a flashing red warning, a warning that the foundations of American economic diplomacy are crumbling. And then Mark Carney responded with just 3 words, a reply that went viral, racking up over 50 million views. But here's the twist. Carney's response wasn't just clever, it was the crystallization of a truth that no one in power wants to admit. You'll want to stick around because by the end of this, you'll see why those 3 words aren't just a rebuttal, they're a game-changing revelation about America's place in the world. Here's what most Americans don't realize. When Trump made that demand, it wasn't about trade. It wasn't even about economics. It was a public display of something far more dangerous. The reality is, the U.S. isn't the dominant force it once was, and not the way it used to be, at least. And Canada's response, it didn't just shut Trump down. It exposed a much deeper problem that has been building for years. But here's the part nobody's saying out loud. The real issue isn't just what Trump demanded. It's what his demand reveals about Washington's failure to grasp how power really works in the 21st century. So ask yourself, how did we get here? And why does this moment matter more than you think? Now, here's the claim. Trump said $2.8 trillion was owed to the U.S. because of trade imbalances, resource deals, and what he called sweetheart agreements. He demanded immediate compensation from Canada. Or else. Sounds bold, right? But here's the catch. There was no evidence, no breakdown of how he came to that figure, just an empty threat. And when Canada asked for proof, what did they get? Silence. The U.S. couldn't back it up. Instead of producing hard evidence, Washington gave nothing but evasions. The Treasury Department said they were reviewing the numbers. The Commerce Department called it classified. Even the Trade Office claimed it was proprietary. What's missing here? The math. Because if you're going to demand $2.8 trillion, you better be able to show your work. And that's exactly what Carney called out with those 3 words, show your work. Now, here's where things start to get even more concerning. This wasn't just a bad move on Trump's part. It was a signal that American economic diplomacy has hit a breaking point. When you push out claims like this, relying only on assertion without evidence, it's a sign of something much bigger. And this isn't just a one-off mistake. It's part of a trend that has been building for years. Think about it. Trump's logic assumes America's sheer size and power will force compliance. It worked in the past, right? But now, that assumption is starting to fall apart. Just look at how this played out. Carney didn't get defensive or angry. He didn't get lost in the details. Instead, he did something much more strategic. He exposed the whole system. What he showed wasn't just a flaw in Trump's reasoning. It was a pattern of American power being exercised without the intellectual rigor it once had. And that's the real issue here. The question now is, what happens when this trend continues? But it doesn't stop there. Here's where things take a darker turn. After Carney's simple demand for proof, it became clear that this wasn't just a diplomatic embarrassment. It was a systemic failure. What followed was a series of contradictions that only made America's position weaker. As Canadian officials pressed for evidence, the U.S. didn't just fail to provide it, they doubled down on evasion. And that's the moment that changes everything. It's not just about a miscalculation or a mistake. It's about the U.S. showing the world that it can no longer back up its claims. What's worse is the underlying truth. America's once unquestioned economic authority is crumbling. Allies and trading partners began to ask, if you can't justify $2.8 trillion, how can we trust anything you say about trade? The $2.8 trillion claim wasn't just wrong, it was a glimpse into how far American credibility has slipped. The truth is, this isn't just a trade dispute. It's an economic credibility crisis. And then things escalated even faster. The world started noticing, and not in a good way. Within days, allies, partners, and even neutral countries started questioning America's competence. First, European officials began talking in hushed tones about how America's trade policy had become post-empirical. Then Asian partners, who've always been cautious, began demanding independent verification of U.S. economic data before they'd even think about making deals. And here's the kicker. Even Mexico, despite its vulnerability to American pressure, demanded third-party arbitration for disputes. What happened if this trend continued? If more countries start doubting America's reliability, how does the U.S. maintain its influence? This isn't just about one trade disagreement anymore. This is a rapid breakdown of trust on the global stage, and it's spreading faster than anyone expected. America is being treated as a less predictable partner. And that's a problem that goes far beyond one $2.8 trillion demand. Now let's talk about how this impacts you, the average person, because here's where it all hits home. When countries begin questioning America's economic reliability, it's not just about international relations. This trickles down to the lives of everyday people. You might not be aware, but this uncertainty is already affecting global markets. And eventually, it will affect your job, your savings, your lifestyle. Canadian pension funds have quietly started pulling back from U.S. assets. European manufacturers are sourcing critical components elsewhere, not because American products are worse, but because American trade policy has become too unpredictable. And even in Asia, investors are shifting away from projects that require American regulatory approval. The global economy is adjusting, and the U.S. is losing its grip. If this trend continues, the consequences will ripple through the entire system, and it won't take long before you feel the effect. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments, because this isn't just an abstract issue, it's your financial future on the line. But beyond the shock and the immediate fallout, there's a deeper mechanism at play here, one that explains how we got to this point. America's failing economic diplomacy isn't just the result of a few bad actors or one errant administration. No, this goes much deeper. This is about a systematic erosion of institutional power. When institutions lose their analytical rigor, when they start replacing expertise with ideology and evidence with assertion, they stop being effective. Instead of careful analysis, America's economic policy has become about spectacle. It's about the loudest voice in the room, the sharpest threat, rather than the strongest argument. And when the world begins to see that, it starts planning around you. Countries hedge their bets, making sure they're not too reliant on a partner that might change its mind on a whim. This isn't just a trend. It's a breakdown of the very system that once made America a global leader. And that's exactly what Carney understood when he asked for evidence. He saw the game America was playing, and he called it out for what it was, a performance, not a policy. So what happens next? The U.S. faces two possible paths, but neither is easy. First, America could double down on its current approach, relying on loud assertions, threats, and raw power to push its agenda. But that path is risky. The world is already reacting, and more countries are distancing themselves from U.S. economic policies. If this continues, American influence could erode even further, and the country may find itself on the outside, struggling to reclaim its position. The second option? A much harder path, rebuilding trust and credibility. This means going back to basics, restoring the analytical rigor, the research, and the reliable, consistent policies that once made America a respected leader. But can the U.S. pull this off? Can political culture as it stands really support a return to these standards? That's the big question. What's clear is that the next move is already in motion, and the momentum is growing. Which way America will go is still up in the air, but the world is watching. And every move matters more than ever. At the end of the day, Carney's three words weren't just a response to Trump's $2.8 trillion demand. They were a crystallization of a much larger, more troubling truth. The U.S. is no longer the unquestioned leader it once was. The real question isn't whether America can continue making demands. It's whether it still has the institutional capacity to back them up. And when your closest ally can humiliate you by simply asking for proof, it signals something deeper. It's not just about a trade dispute. It's about the decline of American credibility on the world stage. The path forward won't come through louder threats or bigger bluffs. It will come from rebuilding trust, returning to evidence-based analysis, and restoring the kind of institutional strength that made America a global leader in the first place. Until then, moments like this will keep happening, and America's position in the world will continue to weaken. If you want to stay updated on how this all unfolds, follow us, and because we're just getting started.